Hi there. My name is Leif Gregerson. I'm a writer, a teacher, and a public speaker. I live in Edmonton, and I'd like to share with you a little bit about perhaps what to do if either you yourself or a loved one is experiencing symptoms that you feel may be related to mental illness. One of the things I wanted to start off with was basically how I started to realize that I had some problems and I needed help for. I had an early experience with psychiatry. One of the things that happened was my mom was prone to depression with psychosis. And there were times when my mom became very ill and was disoriented and didn't seem to recognize me. And quite often, my dad would take her to the hospital. This was the 70s. And the troubling thing back then was that if a person had even a slight problem, they could go to the hospital for many months at a time. Even a med change could take 6 months for someone to go through. So my mom experienced this, and I also experienced depression as far back as elementary school. And it got a little worse and it got a little worse. And eventually it started getting into my behavior. And there are a lot of things. What I'd like to do is I'd like to read a passage from my book. This book is titled Alert and Oriented Times 3, A Snapshot of Severe Psychosis. The way this book came about was that basically I had a medication change. I was on medication that was working well for me and went in to see my doctor one day, and he said, "Well, I have good news. We have a new medication. You don't have to take it as often. It'll work better, and it's generally better all around." So we started out by taking pills. So if anything went wrong, we could stop the pills, and it seemed that everything was going well. And then I was switched to the injection, and the injection was in my bloodstream in a time release formula. So it was 3 weeks in between injections, and unfortunately, I went to see my psychiatrist, and I was very ill, and it was obvious the new injection was causing it. But for some odd reason, I went in to get my injection before seeing him, so it carried on, further on than what it was necessary. So this was a difficult time. One of the ironies of it was at the time I was working at Alberta Hospital, which is our local psychiatric facility, and basically I was teaching creative writing, mostly poetry, something I really enjoyed. And one morning, in the morning, I was a patient. I took the bus home. I got back to the building I live in now, and by that evening, I was a patient in a hospital. I went from teaching a class to becoming a patient in just the space of a few hours. Uh, so I wanted to read a little bit from the book. My father, who has now passed away, his name was also Leif Gregerson, wrote a foreword for the book Alert and Oriented Times 3. So this is my commentary first. The following foreword is an introduction my dad wrote for a book I was never able to use, but I thought it would help introduce this series of poetry, fiction, commentary, and facts about a hospital admission I went through in February of 2019. At a very early stage, this is my dad speaking. At a very early stage in Leaf's childhood, we detected something not quite right, without being able to name it, and I suppose not being willing to accept that our youngest son had shortcomings that very much appeared to be beyond our ability to do much to heal. As Leaf advanced to school age, the expected improvements did not take place, and he now began showing signs of depression that began devastating our family. Coping with an immature child having episodes of an illness that belongs to an adult was at best extremely difficult and often demanded time Leaf's brother and sister did not get. Still, Leaf displayed an intelligence far beyond expectations, and then again, he really did not have the knowledge or methods of application that could have given direction. Teachers at school tried time and again to give leads and directions, which eventually failed. He simply did not have the fertile grounds to allow for growth. Throughout elementary school, Leaf did well as far as classroom work was concerned. He maintained reasonable grades, but was not able to create bonds with the children in his grades. During these years, we were continually faced with withdrawals and isolations that at times appeared to be endless and also impossible to penetrate. When we caught these directly early enough, it was possible to take him out for long drives. During those trips, he would sleep a great deal and gradually come out of depression, and again take part in activities going on around him. This too was time consuming and not always possible, being self employed at the time. His mother staying home was a huge help. Junior high. Now, there is an example of why children of that age should not be separated into their own group. The maturity is simply not present. Leaf is still as smart as he was then, and yet the aggression needed to deal with individuals and groups was just not there. The one upmanship is often a very cruel instrument in those who have already been turned in that direction. Patience and consideration were not a part of that setting. Teachers were not always trained in dealing with challenged children. Those were difficult times for Leaf, and entering into high school was not really an improvement, although he appeared to be dealing with friends better. Then came the big breakdown that removed every hope we ever had. The realization that Leaf was now beyond any hope, that there was no help that would ever come, was finalized. The devastation was impossible to comprehend. During a ski trip to Jasper, Leaf became increasingly incomprehensible. He was in a group along with his sister. The reports we received were mixed and different in what happened. We gathered that the group had eventually left Leaf to his own devices, apparently feeling stretched out, not alone, just off by himself. Within a day of returning home, Leaf was admitted to the U of A hospital and remained there for a short period. He was later sent to Alberta Hospital. From there, it became a treadmill, in and out of hospitals, experimentally discharged, only to become violent, and he forced back into a setting he had become very fed up with. And be forced back into a setting he had become very fed up with. Having alienated himself, it was impossible to live with him. Violence, destruction were repeated again and again. The next years passed, with Leaf living more like a derelict than anyone deserves. Ultimately, he was given decent living quarters in a group home. The beginning of a return to normalcy began. The progress did not stop and is still going. Today, Leaf can boast of the accomplishment of writing 10 volumes of books. Unable to find a publisher, he has single handedly conducted a sales campaign that has yielded great results and kept him fairly affluent, also in part due to support received from people who became his friends. I'd just like to give a bit of a shout out to the people who became my friends. One of them is Richard Van Camp. Some of you may know his name. He wrote some incredible children's books, and he had some short story collections and a few novels. His first novel, The Lesser Blessed, was made into a feature film with Benjamin Bratt in it, and he is probably my best friend in the whole world. Um, Another friend I have is a woman named Charity. I met her at an event in the community, and she was interested in helping me get my books out to the public and different things. And we started to meet for lunch, and we became quite close. Right up until the pandemic, that was, and then our relationship was much more distant. She was very concerned that she could expose herself to COVID, which was just not an option because her grandmother was quite old and quite frail, and she just couldn't conceive of getting COVID and passing it on to her and having her die. Yeah, Charity is just a wonderful person and a very good friend. She wrote part of the introduction as well to the book Alert and Oriented times three. Um, so something I wanted to talk about um, having a loved one with a mental illness. There are a number of things that you kind of have to watch for when a person may be struggling with something. First of all, you have to be concerned if the person is using marijuana or other THC products. Um, these can actually start off a psychosis. They can trigger a psychosis. And if the person is susceptible to schizophrenia genetically or in whatever way, this can trigger off schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is known as one of the most debilitating diseases. And I actually I thought this might be a good time to read the back cover of the book. I had a little bit of information written by the CEO of the Schizophrenia Society of Canada, Dr. Chris Somerville. Leif Gregerson provides up close, first hand insight into the world of schizophrenia, known as potentially the most devastating mental illness accompanied by horrible societal stigma, misunderstandings, misconceptions, and especially mischaracterizations of those living with and recovering from schizophrenia. Mr. Gregerson humanizes this illness by his own lived experience. Most importantly, we see a person, not just a diagnosis. We see his identity as he tells his story. His identity is not rooted in symptoms and pathology, but in purpose, meaning, and how he wishes to help others become more compassionately present with those with mental health challenges and their family members and friends. The whole process or journey is now called recovery. Recovery is living beyond the limitations of a mental illness with meaning, purpose, a sense of identity, and resiliency, social inclusion. Mr. Gregerson lives a life of recovery. Chris Somerville is just a wonderful human being. I first encountered him taking a course through the Schizophrenia Society of Alberta, and he appeared in the course, and I was very pleased that to contact him later and get to know him a little better. Amazing person. Yeah, so one of the first things you want to watch for if a loved one is in their teen years and they use THC is the signs of schizophrenia. Uh, the symptoms of schizophrenia are broken down into positive and negative symptoms. These are not good and bad symptoms. They're sort of one thing. Positive is things that are added to a person's characteristics, and negative things that are taken away. Uh, I tend to focus on the positive symptoms because they're the most troubling, I feel, although negative symptoms can be just as bad. The positive symptoms include delusions, which are false ideas and beliefs in your head, and they're fixed false beliefs. They're very clearly set, and they define the filter of which we view our life through. The next positive symptom is hallucinations, and hallucinations can be auditory, they can be visual, they can be any of the five senses. So when you're looking at the positive symptoms, you're looking at delusions. They give you the wrong idea about reality. And then you get hallucinations, which actually many times reinforce that, false reality. Um, as an example, a person can have a delusion that they're sent to Earth to fulfill a wonderful mission they'll be rewarded for. And something simple as being on a bus. Uh, I was on a bus once, and there was a woman. I knew she was in psychosis, and I didn't really try to do anything to help her or to converse with her, but she said, "Give me a sign, give me a sign." And just at that moment, my nose felt itchy, so I went like that. And she looked at me and said, "Oh my fucking God." Sorry for the swear. She was just blown away with the idea that maybe this was the signal she had been looking for, and you add meaning to these signals. The next positive symptom is paranoia, and paranoia is having delusions that is having ideas in your head that someone's trying to harm you or someone's surveilling you. It sort of speeds up your brain, and it tunes you into things that are not really realistic or actually as prominent as they are. But when you combine these three positive symptoms, delusions, hallucinations, and paranoia, you get a false reality that's very well supported. And it's actually considered that you can't really talk a person out of a bad delusion because um, it's real to them. You see it, you hear it. One of my more prominent delusions that I remember was shortly after I was admitted to hospital for that medication change. Um, I was allowed to go to the mall. It was the middle of winter. And I remember walking back to the hospital and walking through the snow. And I didn't notice it, but I wasn't hearing my own footsteps. But then after a while, I heard footsteps directly behind me. And it was terrifying. And I turned around and there's absolutely no one there, no one around for 200 yards at least, and but the sound was so real. And there's another time when I was in my dad's place, and I was having hallucinations, and these are really funny things, odd, funny, and funny in some ways as well, hilarious. My dad had a clock that I gave him, and there were birds on each of the hours, and it was the clock made a sound tick tick tick, and I was watching the seconds tick by, and the sound of ticking changed to the sound of the clock actually saying fuck 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 fuck. It was just really bizarre. It was almost humorous, but in a way it was also very troubling. um, so some of the other symptoms include some of the symptoms include negative symptoms. I don't really have all of them memorized, but one of them is having a lack of proper hygiene. And I hate to admit it, but this is something with me as well. Um, I find it very difficult, even just to take a quick shower. And so sometimes what I do is I'll kind of force myself just to get in there and wet myself down for thoroughly and scrub myself off with my hand or a brush or something. And maybe not even use shampoo or soap, although most of the time I do. Uh, but when I don't feel motivated, I just push myself to, take that little step. Um, Poor hygiene, depression. Uh, hmm. Yeah, there's a few things, and I'd like to research and get back to that later. As far as the positive symptoms go, all of these the positive symptoms together are usually the main part of psychosis, and that's why I kind of focus on them. And psychosis is a split from reality. It's definitely not psychopathy. It's not anywhere near the same. They call it a psychotic break when you experience when you go from normal to being in psychosis. But psychopathy is a much different thing. It's basically when a person has no moral compass, when they can do anything they want to anybody, and they don't feel bad about hurting them or damaging them, as long as they get their way and get to come out on top and stay looking good. But psychosis is a split from reality. Um, a lot of people say that they've never experienced psychosis and they don't know what it's like, but actually most of us do, because if you have a bad dream, you've experienced psychosis, because you're seeing false things. They feel very real. You have false ideas, and they can often be even more terrifying than they would be if you're experiencing the same thing awake. And in a nutshell, that's psychosis. Uh, the only difference is you can wake up from it. A person with schizophrenia lives with it, um, hopefully, usually for a short period of time, because there's a lot of medications out there that can definitely help a person with psychosis to be restored to sanity. Um, but that, in a nutshell, that's what it's like. So again, I'm going to go back to seeing a loved one with a mental illness. You watch for things like stopping showering, avoiding social contacts, things like that, and lack of energy. um, it's almost like sometimes you forget when you're very ill how to make friendships or relationships. And that's why I feel so fortunate to have people in my life who care. And one thing I think is the hugest part of it is when I went through that hospital stay, and I was at the time friends with Richard and Charity. They stayed by my side. They didn't stop being my friends. And I can remember in earlier times, when I got very sick, where I lost so many friends, it was just ridiculous. And some of them my best friends, and people I thought I would live around for the rest of my life. And there were some people who were really kind, and um, I guess they know who they are. Some of them that I really like to think about sometimes are a family in St. Albert, not far from where I grew up. They were Danielle and Brad, and they were extremely good people, and their family was just amazing. There's even a time when my dad kicked me out of the house, and I had nowhere to go, and they took me in and fed me, and I didn't like the idea of living off them, so I didn't stay with them for very long. But they were extremely kind, and they're Danielle is a friend to this day. I haven't seen Brad in quite a while, but he's still around, and I'd like to contact him. Anyhow, um, some of the things that now once you see a loved one who's starting to experiencing some of these signs, um, it can be really difficult to tell which illness the person has. And if they're abusing drugs, there's the possibility that by stopping them, they can get a little better. Well, they can get a lot better. Definitely, drugs agitate things like psychosis and schizophrenia. Um, Marijuana does, anyways, and methamphetamine, crystal meth, all that sort of stuff. That also can trigger a psychosis. Um, so there are a number of things you can do when you have a loved one who is going through mental illnesses. Probably the first point of contact you should have is a family doctor. And what I suggest is that you write out as much as you can about all the symptoms that have been going on and all the things that have been happening and the changes that have been happening. And go to the doctor's visit with your loved one, and give the paper to, or give the note, if printed out on a computer is even better, if make a few copies, but give that to the doctor. Hopefully the doctor will be able to prescribe some short-term medications and give a referral to a psychiatrist. In most of the places this video is going to end up, it's probably quite a long wait to see a psychiatrist. um, I didn't know much about psychiatrists when I was younger, although my mom did see one. And I just remember that I thought he was an authority figure, and I thought I was in trouble. And he was asking me all these questions in this interview, and I didn't want to be truthful with him, but I tried to do my best. And at the end of it, it really did feel like I was being punished, because he wanted me to come into the hospital for a week, which later became 2 weeks, and became one of the worst times of my youth. Um, Now, unfortunately, what happened, I didn't have, I don't want to blame my family, but I didn't have the awareness of my illness. And I was given medication, which was helpful. But the problem was that I just didn't see it as benefiting me. And it made me feel so different than normal. And it didn't feel good. It was a bad kind of thing, like I was doing illegal drugs or something. And so I stopped taking it. The doctor had explained that, well, the medications will take you from having these highs and lows to making you have a nice sort of smooth sailing and kind of thing. And I kind of saw it as, what good are highs if you've never been low? If you accomplish something and you've never experienced what it was like to fail at something, your accomplishment is going to be pretty meaningless. But that wasn't really what it was about. Uh, it was more about moods, and more about mental stability and things like that. So I did stop taking the medication, and I spent the next few years really in a deep depression. And I won't get into it too much. I've gotten into it in another video a little bit. Um, Eventually, what happened was things got really bad, and I went into psychosis. I had never experienced psychosis before. I had mostly depression and mania, but I went into psychosis, and I had some really bizarre behavior, and I was forcibly confined to Alberta Hospital, which is where I ended up working. Uh, this was not a pleasant place to be by any means back then. Uh, getting kicked out of school and losing my friends and everything was a terrible thing. What happened eventually to get me help was, I sort of went through a lot of life changes. I moved to the West Coast. I started school. I was going to commercial pilot school, which was a big mistake. Although I don't regret it, because I had a wonderful time. Um, so I went to commercial pilot school, and I was out on the coast, and I reconnected with someone I really cared about. And the relationship I had with her was all in my head. It was such an unhealthy thing. We were genuinely friends years back, and she cared about what happened to me, of course. Uh, but the idea I had in my head was that not only did I had the idea that I completely, totally, unconditionally loved her, but that she felt the same way about me, and this was not the truth at all. Um, I sort of felt that if I went back to Edmonton and accepted treatment and went through the hospitals and got everything done properly, that I could win her back, or win somebody back into my life. Or I thought maybe if I got proper treatment, I'd be welcomed with open arms by my family and by my friends. But unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. I lived a very, as my dad said in the note, I lived the life of a derelict. And I had these apartments, and I would isolate myself and sleep for days and read for days, and just cut myself off from the outside world. I went so far as to actually disconnect the buzzer to my apartment because I didn't even want visitors. Uh, so what happened eventually was that I did get very sick. And, when you go to a hospital, you can get some bad apples. And I was locked onto a ward with some pretty bad apples. And I ended up staying there for 6 months. And there was a lot of violence. The patients were violent. Some of the staff were violent. And I spent a lot of time in an isolation room. And I would just scream and shout and kick and swear every filthy word I could imagine. And I wouldn't relent. And they knew I really, really hated going in there. And so they used it as a tool to try and modify my behavior. And I didn't think it would happen, but eventually they broke me, and they made me a lot more compliant. I left that hospital stay heavily medicated and very traumatized, and a lot of things like that, and almost completely unable to take care of myself. What happened was not right away, but eventually, when I was released, I went to a group home where I had regular meals, regular sleep, regular medications. Um, all the other people had mental illnesses, so there was no stigma. I was able to make solid friends and have people to talk to, and my life really began to improve. And that was around when I published my first book. This is the book right here. It's called Through the Withering Storm: My Teen Years with Bipolar Disorder. And at the time, I did have bipolar disorder, although now I have a different diagnosis. Uh, but that book really made a difference in giving back, to the even when I was having a lot of troubles. The fact was, going to the psychiatric hospital was a miracle. When I was first sick, I was in great denial, and my delusions and hallucinations had me thinking a lot of things about the people around me, and I didn't want to say anything about any of them. Partly because I was terrified that I would be punished by the people I was deluded about, or that they would keep me much longer if they knew what was going on in my head. And yet, after just 2 months, they were able to put me on medication that worked to restore me to sanity. And I left the hospital almost fully restored to sanity. The problem was the hospital was in a very remote location. I was stuck out there. um, I think if I hadn't been in a remote location, I might have been able to continue school in some way. I might have been able to keep my car, which I was unable to. I might have not have lost my job. And so I really, when I got out of there, I was sane again, but my life was in chaos. And it just eventually, it almost was not an option to go off the medication because I had to support myself. I had a life to lead. And yeah, above all, I just want to say I'm going to wrap this up at about 30 minutes. I might go 1 or 2 minutes over, but I will continue in further videos. Um, I just wanted to say that the most important thing you can do for a loved one with a mental illness is to build trust. And you can't be an authoritarian. You can't tell them their delusions aren't real. There's a wonderful book. I got to see the author speak. Um, it's called "I'm Not Sick. I Don't Need Help," and it's about a psychologist who had a brother with schizophrenia, and he was able to get him to accept treatment. And it was for him, it was all about trust. And he had a acronym he used called LEAP: listen, empathize, agree, and partner. And he teaches this in different places. And the author, when I saw him online, he was kind enough to give me a free copy of his book. Um, for later videos, I'm gonna find it and I'll try and read some passages from it because it's an incredible work. Yeah, just never give up on your loved one. Um, if they won't shower, run a hot shower for them and just say get in and get wet. Um, if they won't shave, just put get them a proper beard trimmer or something, and explain how to keep their beard neat. There's a lot of things, just little things to make their lives easier. And the idea is that once you can build that trust, then you can get it across to them that medication is one of the only ways they're going to get better, and that life really will get better. Now, something I want to close with is that approximately 1 in 100 people have schizophrenia. My illness is a little more rare with schizoaffective disorder. I also have anxiety, but with schizoaffective disorder, it's around 1 in 300 people. Although I've run across a number of people with the illness, um, 1 in 10 of these people that have schizophrenia will end their own lives, and this to me is just absolutely devastating. Um, don't let them have that opportunity to give up hope and love, empathize, agree, partner, trust, all those things. Stick with them. There's hope, and they're human beings, and with the right treatment, with time, they will return to you. Thank you very much for listening, and that's about it for today. There will be more.